emergency, you have the air. Shot fired. Officer, head off your shot squad. Officer, 3751 South Polk at a 10-1.
Over the decades, the badge has slowly been tainted by some corrupt Chicago cops. Their involvement with the Chicago outfit, street gangs, cop rip-off crews, and the unjustified killings of some civilians by cops. Along with the blue wall that conspired to keep criminal conduct of cops hidden by other cops, all of this combined is partially responsible for chipping away at respect for the badge. And these are just a few of the many bad cops. The highest ranking Chicago cop ever convicted of criminal activity is Deputy Chief William Hanhart. Hanhart joined the force in 1953. The first 15 years of his career, he was a cop's cop and was a tough cop with many commendations for bravery. He took on the most dangerous criminals and the best burglars in Chicago. And he had shootouts with many violent criminals and killed a few over the years. As a detective, he was also responsible for solving a couple high-profile cases. He was promoted to chief detective and headed the elite CIU detectives unit. He handpicked many of the department's best detectives for the unit. His unit put hundreds of Chicago's most dangerous and violent criminals in prisons across the state. But years later, something within him changed. First Ward Alderman Fred Rohde was second in command of the Chinatown Crew's 7th family. They handled the political, judicial, and law enforcement aspects for the outfit. Alderman Rohde was instrumental in pushing the city council to promote William Hanhart to deputy chief in the late 1970s, and he became the Chicago outfit's most important plant in the department. He had access to all ongoing investigations, and he informed the outfit about snitches and ongoing investigations, and was paid monthly for his services, and given a new car every 2 years by the outfit. And it didn't seem to matter that he was screwing over good cops, handling many of those ongoing investigations. Hanhart's bagman was an outfit-connected detective, Fred Picenti. He was connected to childhood friend Tony Spilatro. In the early days, Tony met all the outfit hiracy at his parents' restaurant. And years later, Spilatro became part of top loan shark Mad Sam DiStefano's crew. Hanhart met Spilatro and Picenti in the early days of their burglary careers in the Patch. Hanhart eventually became close to Picenti after he became a police detective, and his friend Tony Spilatro was the link to the outfit bosses. Years later, he became the youngest made guy with a lot of clout. Hanhart and his outfit-connected burglary crew became the best jewelry thieves in the business. They were very professional and sophisticated in planning and executing their heists. From the early 1980s to the mid-1990s, they committed many burglaries and stole tens of millions of dollars of high-end diamonds and gems from jewelry stores and couriers across the country. Some of the jewels were eventually found in outfit burglar Sam DiStefano's safety deposit boxes, and some were found in loan shark and hitman Frankie the Breeze Calabrese's home in a hidden wall safe, well after he pled guilty to racketeering in 1997 and was sent to prison. The new owner of the home found the jewels in cash and turned all of it over to the FBI. In October of 2000, the feds indicted retired Deputy Chief William Hanhart and 6 other mob burglars. One of his top burglars was the nephew of top loan shark Mad Sam DiStefano. They were all convicted, and Hanhart received 12 years. And his bagman, Detective Picente, was charged in a different case and received 18 months in prison for wire fraud. Deputy Chief William Hanhart was the highest-ranking Chicago cop ever to be prosecuted, convicted, and sent to prison for serious crimes. And there were many other cops on the outfit's payroll that looked the other way over the decades. And it was now clear Hanhart opened the highest level of the department to the outfit. Joseph Medzanowski is one of the greatest enemies of good cops. In the beginning, he was a very effective cop. During his 22-year police career, he received 59 citations for valor and arrests, and was publicly praised for his high number of drug and illegal weapon busts. He was promoted and became a specialist in the gang crimes unit. This is when Medzanowski changed, and so did his partner John Galligan. They started stealing drugs and cash from drug dealers and torturing them in the process. And they started a close business relationship with gang member Nelson Babyface Padilla. He was a member of the Latin Lovers Street Gang. Padilla claimed he and Medzanowski and Galligan participated in 15 drug robberies in the 1980s and early 1990s. Medzanowski began operating a Miami to Chicago large-scale drug ring. They distributed cocaine to the leaders of these street gangs: the Latin Lovers, Imperial Gangsters, Spanish Cobras, and the Maniac Latin Disciples. And these relationships went on for years. Daniel Sempilla, a former lieutenant in the gang crimes unit, said he was at a loss to explain why Medzanowski became so corrupt. He's some kind of weird, sinister person. I can't figure it out. Dealing drugs with gangbangers, giving them guns and ammunition, giving up covert vehicles, identifying undercover cops, and going on fishing trips with gangbangers. There's something flawed in his brain and his personality. I cringe when I hear the name Joe Medzanowski. He had a lot of people fooled. On December 16, 1998, FBI agents arrested Medzanowski at the precinct, and his house of crime came tumbling down. In April 2001, Hammerin' Joe Medzanowski was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For racketeering and drug conspiracy, he was sent to Milan Federal Prison to serve his life sentence. Even after he was convicted, Medzanowski tried to set up the murder of the lead prosecutor in his case. 22 suspects were arrested with Medzanowski. 18 pled guilty and received reduced prison sentences for cooperating with the government. This included his partner, John Galligan. He received 5 years in prison. And 4 cops went to trial with Medzanowski and were all convicted. At Medzanowski's trial, prosecutors played more than 250 secretly tape-recorded conversations between him and many gang leaders. In the end, it was Medzanowski's big mouth that did him in. He was by far one of the most dangerous Chicago cops to ever hold a badge. Disgraced Chicago Police Sergeant Eddie C. Hicks served in the ranks of the CPD for over 2 decades. In December of 2001, Hicks was indicted for operating a gang of CPD cops and CPD employees that robbed drug houses. Hicks and his robbery crew stole guns, thousands of dollars in cash, kilos of cocaine, and hundreds of pounds of marijuana. Hicks never showed up in court in June of 2003, and he was placed on the FBI's most wanted list. Hicks was arrested in Detroit 15 years later, in September of 2017. 3 other crew members were convicted and sentenced to prison terms, and 15 years later, Hicks was sentenced to 13 years in prison by a federal court in Chicago. Chicago Police Sergeant Ronald Watts was a police officer for 19 years. Cook County State's Attorney Kim Fox claims Watts and the men under his command operated a drug protection racket in the Ida B. Wells public housing project. She further claimed Watts taxed drug dealers for protection and targeted their competition, and set up over 200 men by planting drugs on them that refused to pay the tax. She also claimed Watts and his crew were major players in the drug trade for nearly a decade. In 2007, Chicago police officers Sharon Spalding and her partner, Danny Echeverria, informed the CPD brass about Watts' corrupt activities. The CPD brass told them to disregard the wrongdoing because of lack of proof. Her and her partner went to the FBI and spent over 5 years working undercover on a joint FBI-CPD internal affairs investigation. They claim the investigation uncovered a massive criminal enterprise within the department. This investigation led to proof of theft by Watts and Muhammad during a sting operation, but they never acquired proof or convicted any cop of extorting drug money or planting drugs on drug dealers or their associates. In February 2012, Sergeant Ronald Watts and one of the officers under his command, Khalid Muhammad, were arrested after Muhammad was caught robbing a drug courier of over $5,000 during a CPD FBI sting. Muhammad claims he split the proceeds with Watts. Both Watts and Muhammad pled guilty. Watts was sentenced to 22 months and Muhammad received an 18-month sentence. And this opened the door for criminals put in jail by Watts and his crew to claim they were set up. Officer Spalding and Echeverria sued the Chicago Police Department. They claim they were threatened and treated like outcasts for violating the CPD's code of silence. Years later, they won a $2 million lawsuit against the CPD and never testified against Watts. The cops that worked with Watts were never charged with the decades-long crimes they were accused of committing. The Justice Department was satisfied with these minimal charges and light sentences for Watts and Muhammad, and never followed up on the other crimes they were accused of. And I must ask why.
For about 2 decades, former Sergeant Watts and other officers he worked with damaged hundreds of lives. But today was a win in court for dozens of men and women who were unjustly convicted for crimes they say they didn't commit.
Watts has only served about 2 years in prison, and many of the officers who schemed with him are still on the force. Attorney Joel Flaxman says a FOIA lawsuit to gather more information on the city's investigation has been filed.
They all claim they were set up by Watts, and these unproven claims were made by men that were gang members, career criminals, drug addicts, and drug dealers with decades-long rap sheets. Most have filed lawsuits against the Chicago Police Department and the city of Chicago. The claims of setups by Watts started after he and Muhammad pled guilty to theft. The big problem here is Kim Fox and her prosecutors did not present proof or investigate these claims on an individual basis. Instead, she took the accusations of convicted criminals, and their claims they were set up became proof of innocence. The odds that all these men were set up by Watts and other cops under his command would be in the millions. Chicago police detective and commander John Burge was a Chicago police officer for 22 years. He worked out of the 2nd and 3rd police districts. These districts police the most violent South Side neighborhoods in Chicago. And over the years, Burge and his midnight crew put away cop killers, murderers, drug dealers, armed robbers, and many other hardcore criminals. Before Burge became a cop, he served in the U.S. Army and did tours in Korea and Vietnam. Burge earned a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, and 2 Army Commendation Medals for Valor. During his 20-year police career, he earned 13 commendations and a letter of praise from the Department of Justice. John Burge and his midnight crew were accused of torturing more than 100 mostly black men from 1972 to 1991 to secure confessions.
And it's a disgrace that in this city, in the 1980s, people could be subjected to abuse and torture, ranging from guns to the face, guns and mouths, suffocating, electric shocks, radiator burns, that sort of thing.
In February of 1982, Andrew and Jackie Wilson were arrested for the murder of 2 Chicago police officers, Richard O'Brien and William Fahey. They were viciously gunned down by the Wilson brothers during a traffic stop. They had an eyewitness to the shooting that ID'd the brothers and described step by step how the incident unfolded, and cops recovered the slain officers' stolen revolvers.
Patrolman Richard O'Brien, shot once in the head, died in a hospital Tuesday. Patrolman William Fahey, shot 3 times in the chest, died yesterday. Just hours before O'Brien and Fahey were shot, another Chicago policeman was buried. Patrolman James Doyle was shot to death last week as he was escorting a robbery suspect off a bus.
So why torture them? They had all this evidence that in the end secured multiple convictions. Over multiple trials, activists and the lawyers of the brothers were able to muddy up the waters with repeated claims of coercion through torture. The problem is, the only proof were the photos of Andrew Wilson with multiple injuries. Detectives denied abusing the suspects and said that any injury suffered came after the interrogations. The Wilson brothers were both convicted in multiple trials, and the only significant thing that changed during the trials was the repeal of Andrew Wilson's death sentence. 7 years later, in 1989, after all avenues were exhausted by Andrew Wilson and his lawyers, they decided to file a federal civil rights lawsuit against Burge and the Midnight Crew. In the end, he lost this case. In 1990, a reporter for the left-wing activist publication, the Chicago Reader, published a lengthy article titled "The House of Screams." A short time later, an anonymous letter arrived at the People's Law Office. They represented Andrew Wilson in the civil lawsuit. This letter led them to Anthony Holmes, a convicted murderer and active member of the vicious gangster Disciple Street Gang. He was known by the nickname Satan. Chicago police alleged that he confessed to orchestrating the killing of Joseph Murphy in 1972 because Murphy intended to testify against Holmes's brother-in-law, Luther Colburn. And Holmes claimed he had been tortured too. And he conveniently produced a list of 30 men he claimed had been tortured by Burge's crew.
Okay, and how big was this brown paper bag?
About like this.
Okay, you indicated about the size of a, was it a paper bag?
Yes, a brown paper bag.
And how wide was the bag?
About like that there.
Can you tell me who it was that put a plastic bag over your head?
Burge.
Did you see him do it?
I'm watching him when he did.
And where did he retrieve this bag from?
From the side, I guess by his desk.
Okay.
I don't know if it come out the drawer on the floor, but it was there.
All right, and can you describe the kind of plastic bag that he put over your
Like
head?
a waste paper bag.
Like a waste paper bag?
Yeah, except it was clear.
Okay. And when he put that bag over your head, what occurred?
He told me not to bite through it. and twisted it. And I told him, I said, you got to be out of this cut. I ain't let me put this over my head. And I bit through it. I was laying flat on the floor. He lifted me off the floor. I was on my back, and he lifted me up and pulled the bag off my head, because I know when I woke up, opened my eyes, the bag was off my head. And I thought, like I said, the last time, I said, this is it. Because, it felt like 1,000 needles going through my body. Each time it shocked me. And then I got the burning sensation, and it was just too much. And so when he lifted me off the floor the last time, I said, this is it. Man, whatever you want me to say, do it, I did it. Whatever it is, kill the president, yeah, I did that too.
In 1997, Andrew Wilson won a $1 million judgment against the city of Chicago in favor of his civil rights suit. The judgment was structured so that Wilson did not get any money. The largest share of the money, $900,000, went to the People's Law Office, which had represented Wilson in the case. Officer Fahey's widow and 2 children received $100,000. And this started a multi-million-dollar industry for lawyers in Chicago. The law firms that represented victims of torture by Burge over the next 2 decades netted them over $100 million of taxpayer money. In 2006, after spending $17 million and reviewing nearly 150 cases, the special prosecutor reported that in only 3 cases, one was the Wilson case, they claimed there was sufficient evidence that proved that 5 Burge detectives had tortured defendants. Because the statute of limitations had expired, no cops in the Midnight Crew were ever charged. The local system couldn't criminalize Burge, but the system found a way to criminalize Burge, and the feds made it happen. In October of 2008, Burge was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of obstruction of justice and perjury. Burge lied and impeded court proceedings in 2003 by giving false written answers to questions in a federal civil lawsuit brought by Madison Hobley.
According to an indictment returned last week and unsealed this morning, former Chicago Police Commander John Burge broke the law when he was supposed to uphold it. According to the indictment, former Commander Burge, while working in Area 2 as a detective, later a sergeant and then a lieutenant, participated in and witnessed the abuse of people in police custody. Make no mistake about it, the people in police custody that were abused and tortured were suspected of awful crimes. Make no mistake, some of them may have been guilty of awful crimes, but that is no excuse. Torture and abuse have no place in a Chicago police station.
Burge was convicted and sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. The Wilson brothers were convicted twice in the cop killing case. And this case opened the door for convicted murderers and convicts to escape jail and their crimes by claiming police brutality. And the lawyers used torture and coercion claims to muddy up evidence of the heinous crimes committed by these men. And it was this case that began to undermine the public's faith in the justice system here in Chicago. Think about the Chicago Police Department of the 1980s. They had 2 suspects that murdered 2 of their own with their service revolvers. Does anybody truly believe that cops didn't take out some form of retaliation on these guys for these crimes? We will never know the truth, because all we have are denials by cops and accusations by convicted criminals looking for a way out of death row or a life sentence. And it's obvious based on the evidence that this could have happened. Anybody that lived in Chicago during the 70s and 80s remembers the rise of the mega gangs and the vicious drug trade under Jeff Fort and Larry Hoover. And the crimes their gangs committed were vicious and heinous ones. People forget most of these men were hardcore career criminals, and the culture of policing at the time did not treat the worst of the worst the way the system wanted them to. In some cases, cops were forced to throw the book out the window to put some of these guys behind bars. Some claim Burge was a racist cop because 97% of the men that claimed to have been tortured by him and his crew were black. But what they won't tell you is the neighborhoods the two police districts covered by Burge were majority black. Looking at all the evidence, I must ask how these sketchy claims led to the release of so many hardcore criminals. Every time another supposed victim of Burge came forward, the claims of torture became more outlandish and sensational. And the lawyers marched these now old men out in front of the cameras, trying to create sympathy. And this was done effectively, and the public and the media bought it, hook, line, and sinker.
Wilson was initially convicted of
30 years later, the facts now indicate the agenda behind the Burge case was to abolish the death penalty and to redistribute wealth in the name of reparations.
I'm commuting the sentence of all death row inmates, 167 of them.
Andrew Wilson died in prison in 2007, and Jackie Wilson was released from prison after spending 36 years behind bars. In 1991, John Burge was suspended, and in 1993 he was fired from the department and died in Florida in 2018. The number of defendants claiming they were tortured into confessing by the Midnight Crew now numbers more than 500. No other cop in the history of the Chicago Police Department cost the city of Chicago more money than John Burge. As of 2022, $130 million has been paid out to suspected victims of Burge and his Midnight Crew. And as I said earlier in the Watts case, the odds that Burge and his crew tortured all of these men would be in the millions. No cop in the history of the Chicago Police Department has done more to damage law enforcement's relationship with the public than Officer Jason Van Dyke. In the early 2000s, the Chicago Police Department started using dash cameras in some of their squad cars. The CPD command knew this would be a double-edged sword, and the rank and file were against the dash cams being put into their squad cars. Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke was a cop for 17 years. For most of his police career, he was stationed at the 8th District. On October 20th, 2014, Jason Van Dyke and his partner, Joe Walsh, responded to a call of a man with a knife. Before they arrived, another police vehicle was trailing 17-year-old Laquan McDonald after he was spotted breaking into cars and was slashing tires of trucks at an industrial park while high on PCP. When Van Dyke arrived, the other squads were trailing him down Pulaski Road, and during this time, the squad following McDonald requested a taser and kept following while waiting for the taser to arrive. But instead, Van Dyke and his partner arrived on the scene first, and they immediately jumped out of their police SUV, and without hesitation, Officer Van Dyke fired 16 shots at the non-compliant 17-year-old Laquan McDonald, walking with a knife in hand. Half of the shots fired by Jason Van Dyke were fired while McDonald was down on the ground, and he died a short time later. Not since the Rodney King beating were the optics so horrible. This incident was far worse and was clearly savage in nature, and it stuck in the minds of the public. The video of the shooting was held for 13 months and clearly shows why the mayor, the state's attorney, and the CPD brass did not want the public to see this footage or reports related to this shooting. And all involved in this incident went into full cover-up mode. A freelance journalist sued the department to release the footage, and a judge found in the reporter's favor, and the video became public in November of 2015. Mass protests followed the release of the video across Chicago, but surprisingly, there was no looting or destruction of city property. Jason Van Dyke was charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of official misconduct. He remained on desk duty after the shooting. He had a history of complaints in his career, but was cleared in most of the cases. He pled not guilty on December 29th of 2015 to the charges against him. On October 5th of 2018, Van Dyke was found guilty of second-degree murder and 16 counts of aggravated battery with a firearm, but was not found guilty of official misconduct.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of second-degree murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of aggravated battery.
On January 18th of 2019, he was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for the second-degree murder conviction. But he only served 3.5 years in prison. And in the eyes of the public, the lenient sentence of Jason Van Dyke was a kick in the teeth. And it sent the wrong message, that's for sure. The family settled with the city of Chicago for $5 million before the video was released.
What happened on October 20th, 2014 should never have happened. Supervision and leadership in the police department and the oversight agencies that were in place failed, and that has to change. I am the mayor. As I said the other day, I own it.
For nearly a century, the city of Chicago has been governed by one party, the Democrat Party. The last opposition party mayor to serve was Bill Thompson. He served as mayor from 1927 to 1931. Over the decades, some Chicago mayors impacted the city in policing through policies that were rarely positive, and most were negative, and the others were the same old policies repackaged. Most of these mayors' legacies were insignificant because some were activists and many were just overseers of the decades-long crime problem running rampant across the city. Over the decades, these mayors changed every aspect of policing, but the one thing they ignored was changing the violent culture that is presently devouring many neighborhoods across the city. The 48th mayor of Chicago was Richard J. Daley. He served from 1955 to 1976. During his 21 years at the helm, his administration recorded 10,910 homicides, averaging 500 murders per year. Mayor Daley will be remembered for 2 things: the expansion of the city's modern infrastructure, along with some of the lakeshore skyline today. And he made Chicago a world-class city. But where he failed was supporting and implementing the federal government's plan to subsidize and build the superblock projects on the north and south sides of the city. These buildings brought nothing but generational poverty and misery to the black communities. What was birthed in these projects was a violent culture, fueled by extreme poverty, the takeover of gangs, and drugs. These mega-block public housing projects set the stage for 70-plus years of gang violence and murder that is still negatively affecting the city today. Richard M. Daley was the 54th mayor of Chicago. He served from 1989 to 2011. During his 22 years at the helm, his administration recorded 14,653 homicides, averaging 660 homicides per year. Daley II will be remembered for a couple of things. One was ignoring the claims of police torture by Detective John Burge against cop killer Andrew Wilson when he was the Cook County State's attorney. A doctor's report supporting torture claims was presented to Daley by then Chicago Police Superintendent Richard Brezek, and this was brushed under the rug by Daley. The big act Daley will be remembered for is the razing of the mega block buildings. In 1995, after decades of financial mismanagement and scandals within the Chicago Housing Authority, the federal government stepped in and put HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, in charge of the disastrous CHA. In 1999, Mayor Daley regained control of the CHA because HUD deemed the mega buildings a lost cause. Immediately after HUD dumped the CHA back in Daley's lap, he and HUD Secretary Andrew Cuomo announced a transformational plan to knock down 51 of the mega block project buildings across the city. In 2000, the demolition started, and by 2010, the last building came crashing down. Low-rise housing for the residents was part of the deal, but only a small fraction of low-rise units were built. So Daley started relocating them into existing housing under Section 8 across the city and suburbs.
Tearing down Cabrini is part of a $1.6 billion overhaul of public housing in Chicago.
It is called the Plan for Transformation, and it's the most sweeping reform of its kind in this country's history. But it has plenty of critics who say the decision to demolish these high-rises is not eliminating the poverty. It's just dispersing it around the city.
The big challenge for the Daley administration was where to put the 16,800 displaced families. Daley had no choice but to insert them into neighborhoods across the city. And what happened was gang rivalries instantly transformed these communities into war zones. This move by Daley had a damned if you do, damned if you don't moment. It was the right decision to knock the buildings down because they were hell on earth for residents. But what they ignored was the extremely violent gang culture. Before 2000, most black gang crime was confined to small pockets on the south and west sides of the city. This action by Daley affected many neighborhoods and police districts across the city. And as it turned out, they helped the few, but in the process, hurt many more. And the consequences are still being felt today. And the violent gang culture cops were tasked to enforce is now being turned against them. Rahm Emanuel was the 55th mayor of Chicago. He served from 2011 to 2019. During his 8 years at the helm, his administration recorded 4,535 homicides, averaging 566 homicides per year. Rahm Emanuel will be remembered for a couple of things. One is the creation of Chicago's sanctuary city policy and the elimination of IPRA, the Independent Police Review Authority. In 2017, he replaced it with COPA, the Civilian Office of Accountability.
Independent Police Review Authority.
While the work is important, we need to have a new organization with a new endeavor.
Mayor Emanuel's worst act was keeping the Laquan McDonald video hidden from the public for 13 months. During this time, the mayor gave the McDonald family $5 million, and attached to the settlement was a gag order restricting them from talking about the incident. The problem is the McDonald family never filed a lawsuit against the city of Chicago, and to the public, it looks like a payoff for their silence.
Accusations of a cover-up have
Just before the video was released by a Cook County judge, Rahm Emanuel was re-elected to a second term in the runoff election. 70% of the public believes he kept the video hidden until after he was reelected mayor.
Thank you. God bless you. And God bless Chicago.
After the public finally viewed the dash cam video, they quickly realized why the Emanuel administration refused to release it. After this cover-up by many, the citizens lost faith in the system of government from the top to the bottom here in Chicago. Lori Lightfoot was the 56th mayor of Chicago. She served from 2019 to 2023. During her 4 years at the helm, her administration recorded 2,945 homicides, averaging 736 homicides per year. She started her term as a strong supporter of the defund the police movement. Fortunately for cops, after she took office, she found the rhetoric was far different from reality, and she eventually changed course. The car pursuit issue has been revised by the past two administrations, including Lightfoot's, over a dozen times. But the one thing she will be remembered for is handcuffing police with a confusing selective foot pursuit policy. The Illinois State Police continue to chase suspects in cars and on foot. Chicago's pursuit policies have emboldened criminals, and along with her anti-police rhetoric, have put police in danger across the city. All of these mayors have one thing in common. They failed to invest in more police detectives over the decades. Instead, they invested in pet projects across the loop, and lack of detectives has left Chicago with the lowest crime and homicide clearance rates in the country.
Chicago alone needs 2,000 new detectives to handle the current caseload.
What these mayors refuse to understand is a safe city is a prosperous city.
I'm here today to discuss the adverse effects of politics on law enforcement in Chicago. While law enforcement and politics should operate in distinct spheres, their intersection severely undermines the efficiency and the credibility of our police force.
The politically motivated consent decree was being forced on police departments around the country by President Obama's Justice Department. It was rejected for years by the CPD at the federal level, but was later adopted by Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan. In 2019, it became a reality for Chicago cops when it was forced on the CPD.
Policies changed. We went to an investigative stop report, which was 2 pages, took a ton of time to complete, and the numbers dropped big time. So before 2016, we were stopping anywhere from 450 to 500,000 people a year here in Chicago. So it's engaging with the public out there. It's proactive policing. That first year, 2016, we dropped to 108,000 stops, and it's dropped down to now where it's probably in about the 30,000 stops a year.
The CPD's new hiring policy is based on diversity, inclusion, and equity. This is clearly wrong because the department is hiring and promoting cops based on skin color and gender, and this practice excludes qualified candidates.
These elected officials have discarded experience and used race and gender to select the leaders of our department. The last superintendent, David Brown, was probably the worst of all. He brought us scarecrow policing, excessive canceled days off that exhausted our officers, politically motivated punishments and penalties for minor infractions, and promotion after promotion of inexperienced officers based solely on their gender and the color of their skin. We have people now in this department that have actually gone from the rank of sergeant to deputy chief in 10 months, or they've gone from sergeant to commander in less than 2 months.
Breaking tonight, clashes in Chicago as protesters try to topple a Christopher Columbus statue in Grant Park.
Since the COVID lockdowns, the city has spiraled out of control. Cops are under attack and are being forced to stand there and take it. And civil servants of every branch are also under attack across the city.
Developing tonight, a $50,000 reward being offered for information in the shooting of a mail carrier. The postal worker shot during an attempted robbery on the northwest side.
Elise Foster, union president of the National Association of Letter Carriers, says her workers are under attack while doing their job.
Police are searching tonight for 4 men suspected of gunning down a retired city firefighter Thursday during an attempted carjacking.
CFD ambulances and fire trucks are now being caught in gang crossfire. The Loop has become a very dangerous place.
Overnight, chaos in the streets of Chicago. Looting taking place around the city.
Due to looting, smash and grab thefts on Michigan Avenue and in the Loop, and the shootings and mass shootings in the River North Bar and Restaurant Tourist District have left this area under siege by criminals and gunmen.
2 men are in critical condition following a shooting that happened just after midnight in the Loop.
So that shooting sent 3 people to the hospital in critical condition, including a man who was shot in the head. Now, people in the community say that these shootings have gotten worse, and city leaders are blaming it on nightclubs.
And it's become lawless, and it is not safe downtown today. The Safety Act no cash bail legislation was passed by Democrats in Springfield. This is the final nail in the coffin of policing in Illinois. This legislation will increase police interactions with violent repeat offenders and will put more cops and the public in danger from criminals that should be behind bars.
Illinois state legislators also passed the 800-page Safety Act in the early hours of the morning with little to no discussion whatsoever. They passed this act and it gave us no cash bail that just went into effect last week. On the first day of no cash bail last week, individuals charged with violent crimes were released without any restrictions.
So if you talk to a 32-year-old or a 23-year-old, I think you said today, would you encourage them to be a police officer?
Yes, but not in Chicago.
Wow.
In the line of duty, I have found cops react differently in violent situations. Some reactions are based on training, policy, and past incidents, but most cops react from the human position of fear and survival. And because of these facts, not all the training in the world will change the outcomes of these violent situations. The job of a police officer can be rewarding and sometimes demand the ultimate sacrifice during their career. Over the Chicago Police Department's 188 years of service, 558 Chicago police officers sacrificed their lives keeping the public safe. 379 of these officers were shot and killed in the line of duty. These men and women are honorable, selfless public servants that left their loved ones behind in service to the city. What is happening to policing today is not what these men and women died for over the years. Policing is presently under attack from every corner of society, along with the disrespect for the badge. The present policies are handcuffing cops. This has put policing in crisis in Chicago. The consequences for this are now being felt. Large numbers of cops are leaving the profession because they are being demoralized, exhausted, and stretched thin, and recruitment is way down. If society does not change course immediately, people will find themselves doing the jobs of cops to protect their families, property, and themselves from violent criminals. This radical transformation of policing by the Democrat Party in Chicago is presently leading policing in the city down the road to ruin. And due to the massive spike in crime, people are now learning the hard way that the civilized society cannot remain civilized without cops.
Officer down! Gunshot wound to the chest.
Units be advised on the citywide and in the 25th district. We're getting a 10-1, a 10-1 behind the 25th district. We got shots fired at the police. Got an officer down, 10-1.